we need to talk about what happened to the big three: the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. Powerlifting used to dominate just about every aspect of lifting culture, with every serious gym goer doing the squat, bench, and deadlift. You would even see professional bodybuilders do them, with some even competing in powerlifting itself, like Ronnie Coleman, for example. The powerlifting oriented mindset that was like nestled into like every aspect of fitness at the time pushed for an emphasis on the big three lifts above all else, no matter what the goal was. Even when it came to building muscle, the big three were thought to be some of the most effective tools in order to grow muscle. For example, in order to grow a bigger chest, most people would suggest just get a bigger bench or train the bench more. In order to get a bigger quads, it was just do more squats, get a stronger squat, grow the squat. And then for the back as a whole and the glutes and hamstrings, the whole posterior chain, it was thought to be developed through the deadlift and getting a bigger deadlift. Unfortunately, this approach kind of closed off a lot of like bodybuilders or hypertrophy enthusiasts from doing super effective exercises like using machines. So that was kind of a negative. This also meant that you would see most exercises bodybuilders were doing were the same exercises powerlifters were doing. So you would rarely see people doing a Smith machine, for example. Like there was a time where the Smith machine was never used and was even hated.
I would like to discuss with you a colossal waste of space known as the Smith machine.
The collective understanding on how to properly train eventually drifted away from this towards more like optimal movement patterns, which is probably a net positive for the lifting culture, but it is something to think about that it has shifted so drastically within the last couple of years. And I would even say we've gone so far in the other direction that you will now see empty squat racks and every Smith machine taken. And then you'll look over to the cable machine and there's going to be a skinny kid doing Keenan flaps and cuffed lateral raises. Which is not to say that optimal exercises are bad. It's just that it has gone too far. And there is value in that powerlifting oriented mindset that seems to have been like completely lost in the new lifting culture. The big three aren't inherently bad for building muscle. There are better exercises when you analyze them on paper. But in practice, there's a very small difference between the big three and their most optimal counterparts. Are the optimal exercises better most of the time? Yes, but not that much better, and their existence certainly doesn't rule out the use of the squat, bench, and deadlift. The issue that does arise from programming these three lifts is not that they're not optimal. It's due to an egotistical attachment to the weights being used on the exercises. Many people tend to let their form slip, or they use an extreme like powerlifting style approach, like a arched bench press. Really excessively arched wide grip bench press, super low bar squat, sumo deadlift, which are things that may not be the best for muscle growth. So I would argue that if the big three lifts are suboptimal, it isn't due to a lack of stability, lack of convergence, or a lack of muscular emphasis. It's due to the ego attached to the lift. And ego can change the way that these lifts are executed. Right? In the pursuit of muscle growth, many who opt to do these exercises and use these powerlifting techniques are just satisfying their emotional attachment to the weight. And this does reduce the stimulus to fatigue ratio and makes the aforementioned suboptimal traits of the big three significantly worse. When done this way, the exercises are not nearly as effective as like a hack squat, a converging chest press, or a Romanian deadlift. But if you bench with proper technique, right, maybe a little bit of a narrower grip, not like bouncing like crazy, like t-shirt touch or even a pause. If you do a high bar upright squat, conventional deadlift even, they're not going to be that much work, not even significantly less effective than those optimal exercises I just mentioned. You're getting a very similar stimulus, very similar, with a lot of potential benefits that you don't get from the optimal movements. I would even argue that the big three can be the most optimal. And what makes them the most optimal is the way that it can impact your mindset. Now, this is an often overlooked aspect of training, but is probably the most important when it comes down to long-term progress and adherence, which is what's going to make the most difference, right? Choosing an exercise purely because it produces the best gains is a clear outcome-oriented approach, which is detrimental in an activity like building muscle that takes months and years, right? It's a long-term journey. Focusing on the outcome means that the day-to-day process of getting to that outcome is going to be less enjoyable. That's not what you like. You like the outcome, not the journey there. And focusing on that outcome makes what really matters less enjoyable, right? And what really matters is the everyday grind and that journey for such a long-term pursuit. So enjoying the process, right? Being process-oriented means that the goal will naturally come easier and success will be guaranteed over time. This matters a lot, actually, because most people that do the big three really enjoy the squat, bench, and deadlift. If you go into the gym every day and you are excited to bench, excited to squat, excited to deadlift, you're ready. You're just going to go further than somebody who hates a hack squat and just does it because it's the most optimal and produces the best outcome. And there's actually a lot of evidence to back this up. Bodybuilders used to compete and train in powerlifting, as I discussed earlier. And if they didn't do that, right, they were doing many of the same exercises that you'd find in powerlifting programs. And if that training style was so bad and so suboptimal, what you would find is that there would be a significant improvement in physiques since we've switched to a more optimal approach, right? And that's not what we've seen. We've seen more good physique since then, but that's because the sport and the industry has gotten more popular and more mainstream. So there's a larger pool of people to draw from to get better physiques. But at the very highest level, there hasn't been much improvement, if any improvement, between the best physique from 20 years ago and the best physique now. Ronnie Coleman, right? Ronnie Coleman still mogs everybody today. And what did Ronnie Coleman do? I think we know. Now, this indicates that the choice of exercise is not nearly as important as has been suggested in this modern era. I mean, the thing that really matters in the long run, and what matters in the long run is what really matters, right? So the thing that really matters is having a extremely passionate interest in showing up every day and training really fucking hard, right? When the focus shifts away from that towards being optimal, getting out of the intermediate experience level is super unlikely. Optimal exercises are better for gaining muscle. I understand that. But for all of the reasons I listed, I would argue that when done with reasonable technique and serious intensity, the big three lifts are very viable for building muscle, and for some people, maybe even more effective than anything else. If you want to access my free program, go ahead and click the link in the description, right? It's a link to my website. You can see all of my personal programs just for you, right? Depending on what your goals and how many days a week you can lift are. Go ahead and like and subscribe. That would be lovely. I'll see you in the next one.